I turned 32 last month and honestly thought I had my life figured out. Married to Willa for 3 years, decent job in logistics, small house we bought together 2 years ago. Nothing fancy, but we were building something. Or so I thought. For my birthday, Willa insisted on having dinner at this upscale Italian place downtown. Said she wanted to celebrate properly with our closest friends and family. Her sister Mira came, my buddy Timothy from work, my parents, and Willa's mom. The whole thing felt a little much for my taste since I usually prefer low-key celebrations, but Willa seemed excited about it, so I went along. The restaurant was packed. Typical Saturday night crowd. We had a corner table for 8 and everything started normal enough. Good food, wine flowing, everyone laughing at Timothy's stories about our incompetent supervisor. My dad was telling embarrassing childhood stories like he always does. Standard birthday dinner stuff. About halfway through the main course, Willa gets this weird look on her face. She reaches for her wine glass and taps it with her knife to get everyone's attention. I figured she was going to do some sweet birthday speech thing. Maybe a little embarrassing, but harmless. She stands up with this smile that didn't quite reach her eyes and says she wants to share something special about our marriage. Everyone goes quiet, looking at her expectantly. My mom even pulled out her phone to record what she thought would be a touching moment. Then Willa looks directly at Mira and says the most incredible thing. She tells her sister that she's wasted 10 years of her life on a pathetic excuse of a man. Says I make less in a year than she spends on shoes, and reminds Mira about some CEO she could have married instead. The whole table just froze. But she wasn't done. Mira actually starts laughing and tells Willa she really scraped the bottom of the barrel with me. Says I should at least be trained better since I can't even afford a decent restaurant for my own birthday. Then Willa adds that my mother was right about me being a genetic failure, like it's some inside joke between them. I'm sitting there with my fork halfway to my mouth, watching my wife and her sister giggle while completely destroying me in front of everyone I care about. My parents looked like they'd been slapped. Timothy just stared at his plate. The other people at nearby tables were starting to notice something was wrong. The weirdest part was how calm I felt. Like my brain just disconnected from the situation and I started thinking clearly for the first time in months. I kept cutting my birthday cake while they talked, just focusing on making even slices and serving everyone like nothing unusual was happening. Willa kept going. She mentioned something about already having her exit strategy planned, how she's been thinking about this for months. Mira was recording parts of it under the table with her phone, which should have made me angrier but somehow didn't. I just kept thinking about how much planning this must have taken. My mom finally found her voice and asked Willa what was wrong with her. Dad looked like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. The whole dinner fell apart after that, with people making awkward excuses to leave early. When we got home that night, Willa acted like nothing had happened. She went through her normal bedtime routine, chatting about random stuff while I sat on the couch trying to process what I'd witnessed. When I brought up the dinner, she just shrugged and said she'd been drinking too much wine. But I knew better. The things she said were too specific, too coordinated with Mira. You don't accidentally mention someone's salary and mock their mother's opinions while drunk. That was planned humiliation. Over the next few days, I started paying attention to things I'd been ignoring for way too long. The financial stuff was the most obvious once I really looked at it. Willa never wanted to go anywhere that cost money when it was my idea, but had no problem dropping $300 on a single shopping trip for herself. Last month, she bought this designer handbag that cost more than our mortgage payment. But when I suggested we go to that new steakhouse for our anniversary, she said we needed to be more responsible with money. She'd also been making these little comments for months that I kept brushing off. When we'd run into people from her work, she'd introduce me as just my first name, never mentioning what I do or anything positive about me. But when she talked about her friends' husbands, it was always about their promotions or new cars or how successful they were. I started noticing she never bragged about me to anyone. The clothes thing was another pattern I'd missed. She'd make these suggestions about what I should wear that weren't really suggestions. If I put on a shirt she didn't like, she'd say things like asking if I was really going out looking like that or mentioning how much better I looked in other outfits. It got to the point where I'd change clothes 2 or 3 times before leaving the house just to avoid her comments. At family gatherings, she'd constantly correct me or interrupt me when I was telling stories. If I said something happened on a Tuesday, she'd jump in to say it was actually Wednesday, like it mattered. If I mentioned enjoying a movie, she'd tell everyone how I fell asleep halfway through. Small stuff that made me look stupid or unreliable in front of other people. The worst part was how she'd react when I accomplished something at work. When I got that promotion 6 months ago, her first response wasn't congratulations. She asked if it came with a real salary increase or just a fancier title. When I told her the actual number, she said it was about time they recognized my value, but then immediately started talking about how her friend's husband just made partner at his firm. I started remembering all these conversations with Mira where they'd talk in this code around me. Comments about how some people settle and others keep their standards high. Discussions about women who married for love versus women who married smart. They'd include me in these conversations, but I always felt like I was missing some inside joke. Even the bedroom stuff had changed, though I didn't want to admit it to myself. She'd started treating intimacy like a chore she had to get through. Always had her phone nearby, checking messages even during what should have been private moments between us. Made me feel like I was inconveniencing her by wanting to connect with my own wife. I also realized she'd been testing me in ways I hadn't recognized. She'd make plans without asking me, then get annoyed when I had scheduling conflicts. She'd commit us to social events I didn't want to attend, then act like I was being difficult when I expressed hesitation. It was like she was seeing how much control she could take without me pushing back. Looking back, the birthday dinner wasn't some random outburst. It was the culmination of months of her losing respect for me and finally feeling comfortable enough to say it out loud. She'd been building up to that moment, testing the waters with smaller humiliations until she was confident I wouldn't fight back. The worst part wasn't even the public humiliation. It was realizing that my wife fundamentally didn't respect me as a person. She saw me as someone beneath her, someone to endure rather than love, and she felt comfortable enough in that belief to mock me in front of my own parents. I've been married to this woman for 3 years. We've talked about having kids, buying a bigger house, planning our future together. The whole time, she was apparently just waiting for something better to come along. So here's where I need advice. I'm not the kind of person who just walks away from problems, but I also can't pretend this never happened. She destroyed something fundamental between us in front of everyone we know. My own mother keeps calling to check on me because she's so worried. Willa keeps acting like everything is normal. She's planning our upcoming weekend trip like nothing changed. When I try to bring up the dinner, she either deflects or gets angry that I'm dwelling on it. Says I'm being too sensitive and need to learn to take a joke. But I keep thinking about that recording Mira made. Why would you record your sister humiliating her husband unless you plan to use it somehow? What was the point of that whole performance? I'm not sure what I'm going to do yet, but I know I can't keep pretending everything is fine. This isn't about forgiveness or working through problems. This is about recognizing when someone has shown you exactly who they are. More updates to follow if people want to hear how this plays out. Right now, I'm just trying to figure out my next move. Update 1. First off, thanks to everyone who commented on my original post. Reading your responses helped me realize I wasn't overreacting to what happened at that birthday dinner. Some of you asked for updates. So here's what's been going down since then. The biggest thing that happened was a real conversation with Willa. Not the deflection and gaslighting she'd been pulling, but an actual sit-down where I refused to let her change the subject or minimize what she did. It took 3 attempts before she agreed to talk seriously, and honestly, I had to corner her to make it happen. Tuesday night, she was getting ready for bed and doing her usual routine of acting like nothing was wrong. She started talking about plans for the weekend, mentioning some farmer's market she wanted to visit, and I just couldn't take the pretending anymore. I told her we needed to discuss what happened at the restaurant before we made any future plans together. Her first response was the same dismissive attitude she'd been using all week. She said she'd already explained that she drank too much wine and didn't mean anything by it. When I pointed out that everything she said was too specific and coordinated with Mira to be accidental, she got defensive and accused me of being paranoid and holding grudges. So I asked her directly about the recording. Why would Mira film her sister humiliating her husband unless they planned to use it for something? Willa's whole demeanor changed when I brought that up. She went from dismissive to actually angry, like I'd caught her in something she didn't expect me to notice. She tried to claim Mira was just recording random moments from the dinner for memories, but when I asked her to show me the video, she said Mira had already deleted it, which obviously made no sense if it was supposed to be a nice memory of my birthday celebration. That's when the real conversation finally started. I told her I'd been thinking about all the ways she'd been treating me for months, and I laid out everything I mentioned in my first post: the financial double standards, the public corrections, the lack of support for my achievements, all of it. Instead of denying it or apologizing, Willa got more aggressive. She said she never realized how sensitive I was about everything, and that maybe I should focus on improving myself instead of analyzing her behavior. She actually said that if I was more successful and confident, I wouldn't be so bothered by her honest observations about our relationship. Then she started justifying everything she'd said at the dinner. She told me it was true that she could have married someone with better prospects, and that her friends often comment on how she settled when she chose me. She said the CEO she mentioned was someone she dated in college who's now worth millions. And sometimes, she does wonder what her life would have been like if she'd made different choices. The part that really got to me was when she said her mother and Mira had been encouraging her to reconsider our marriage for over a year. They apparently think I'm holding her back from the lifestyle she deserves. and that she's wasting her prime years on someone who'll never be able to provide the kind of life her education and looks could have gotten her. She said she'd been trying to motivate me to be more ambitious and successful, but that I seemed content with mediocrity. The birthday dinner comments weren't meant to humiliate me. They were supposed to be a wake-up call about how other people see our relationship. I asked her if she understood how insane it sounded to publicly mock your husband as a motivation for him to improve. She said she knew it wasn't the best approach, but that subtle hints hadn't been working and she was frustrated with my lack of progress. The conversation went on for over 2 hours, and by the end, I realized that this wasn't about the birthday dinner. This was about fundamental incompatibility and her complete lack of respect for who I am as a person. She sees me as a project to fix rather than a partner to love. When I asked her directly if she wanted to stay married to me, she said she wasn't sure anymore. She said she loves me, but isn't sure if love is enough when there are so many practical concerns about our future together. She mentioned wanting kids someday and wondering if I'd be able to provide the stability and lifestyle she wants for a family. Here's the thing that really crystallized everything for me. When I asked what would need to change for her to respect our marriage, her list was basically a complete personality transplant. She wanted me to be more aggressive about career advancement, more social and outgoing with her friends, more willing to spend money on experiences and lifestyle improvements, and generally more alpha in my approach to life. She wasn't asking me to grow or improve in healthy ways. She was asking me to become a different person entirely, someone who prioritized money and status the way she does, someone who saw relationships as competitions rather than partnerships. The next morning, I called in sick to work and spent the day thinking about everything she'd said. I also called my mom, who'd been checking on me since the dinner. When I told her about the conversation with Willa, my mom was furious in a way I hadn't seen since I was a kid getting bullied at school. She said she and my dad had discussed the birthday dinner extensively, and they were both disgusted by how Willa treated me. My mom said she'd never liked how Willa talked down to me, but that she'd stayed quiet because she didn't want to interfere in my marriage. After seeing what happened at the restaurant, she regretted not speaking up sooner. My dad came over that evening, which was unusual for him since he usually calls first. He sat me down and told me that no woman who truly loved me would ever humiliate me publicly the way Willa did. He said he and my mom raised me to be a good man with decent values, and that anyone who saw those qualities as weaknesses wasn't worth my time. He also mentioned that he'd talked to Timothy, who'd reached out to him after the dinner to check on how I was doing. Apparently, Timothy had been noticing Willa's treatment of me for months and had wanted to say something but didn't know how to bring it up. He'd seen her dismiss my opinions in group conversations and roll her eyes when I talked about work or hobbies I enjoyed. The most eye-opening thing my dad said was that marriage should make you feel more confident and supported, not constantly inadequate and criticized. He said watching Willa interact with me reminded him of how his own father used to make his mother feel small and unworthy, and he'd hoped I'd never accept that kind of treatment in my own relationships. By Thursday, I'd made my decision about what needed to happen next. I wasn't going to try to fix this marriage or convince Willa to respect me. I was going to focus on protecting myself and building a life where I didn't have to constantly defend my worth to my own spouse. I started by opening my own checking account and having my paycheck deposited there instead of our joint account. I also changed my direct deposit information for the savings account we'd been building for a house down payment. If Willa wanted to evaluate our relationship based on financial contributions, she could see exactly what those contributions looked like when I stopped making them. I also reached out to a divorce attorney, just to understand my options and what the process would look like. I'm not ready to file anything yet, but I wanted to know where I stood legally and financially if this marriage continues heading downhill. The lawyer told me to start documenting our assets and debts and to keep records of any major financial decisions or conversations about the future of our relationship. Nothing dramatic or secretive, just basic preparation in case we can't work things out. Willa noticed the change in my bank account setup when she went to transfer money for groceries and saw that my last paycheck hadn't been deposited. When she confronted me about it, I told her I was taking some space to evaluate our relationship and needed to separate our finances temporarily. She accused me of being vindictive and trying to punish her for being honest about her feelings. I explained that I wasn't punishing anyone, but that I needed to understand what my life would look like if I wasn't subsidizing someone who saw me as a disappointment and a settling choice. We're still living in the same house, but the dynamic has completely changed. I'm not trying to win her back or prove my worth to her. I'm focused on figuring out whether this marriage has any foundation to build on, or if we're just two people who want fundamentally different things from life. The weird part is that I feel clearer and more confident than I have in months. Not having to constantly worry about Willa's approval or criticism has been liberating in a way I didn't expect. More updates coming as this situation develops. Right now, I'm just taking things day by day and trying to make decisions based on what's actually best for my future, not what might save this relationship. Update 2. The situation with Willa has escalated in ways I didn't expect. And honestly, some of you called this in the comments on my last post. Several people said that once I started setting boundaries and protecting myself financially, she'd either try to love bomb me back into submission or get more aggressive about controlling the narrative. Turns out, it was option 2. The first thing that happened was Willa started telling her version of events to anyone who would listen. She's been portraying our financial separation as me being vindictive and trying to punish her for being honest about our relationship problems. According to her narrative, I'm being emotionally abusive by withholding money and refusing to work on our marriage like a mature adult. She called her mom on Friday night, and I could hear parts of that conversation from the kitchen. Willa was crying and telling her mother that she was trying to motivate me to be more ambitious, but that I'd taken everything the wrong way and was now threatening to leave her. She said she was scared I was having some kind of breakdown and that she didn't know how to help me anymore. What really bothered me was hearing her describe the birthday dinner as a misunderstanding where she'd had too much wine and made some thoughtless comments that I was now blowing out of proportion. She told her mom that my family was poisoning me against her and that my parents had never liked her anyway. When she got off the phone, she came into the kitchen and asked if we could talk. She said her mother was very concerned about our marriage and wanted us to consider couples counseling. Willa had already researched therapists in our area and found someone who specialized in communication issues and financial stress in relationships. I told her I wasn't interested in counseling with someone who had publicly humiliated me and then spent a week minimizing and justifying that behavior. She got upset and said she'd apologized multiple times, which wasn't true. She'd explained her reasoning and expressed regret about the timing, but she'd never actually apologized for the content of what she'd said or acknowledged how hurtful it was. We ended up having another long conversation about what had actually happened at the restaurant. I walked through everything she'd said, including the comments about my mother and her sister's contributions to the humiliation. Willa kept trying to reframe each comment as either a joke that went too far or a poorly expressed concern about our future together. When I brought up Mira recording the whole thing, Willa finally admitted that her sister had been documenting what she called my negative reactions to constructive criticism. She said they'd been worried about my emotional stability for months and thought having evidence of my defensiveness and anger might be helpful if I ever needed professional help. That revelation was honestly more disturbing than the original birthday dinner. They'd been planning to gaslight me about my own emotional responses to their treatment, and they thought recording my reactions to being humiliated would somehow prove I was the problem in our marriage. I asked Willa how she could think that was a reasonable way to handle concerns about our relationship. She said she'd been trying to address our problems directly for months, but that I was resistant to feedback and got defensive whenever she tried to discuss areas where I could improve. The conversation went in circles for over an hour, with Willa insisting that her intentions were good, even if her methods were flawed. She kept saying that she loved me and wanted our marriage to work, but that I needed to be willing to grow and change if we were going to build the kind of future she envisioned for us. By Saturday, Timothy had started reaching out to mutual friends from my work and social circles. Not to gossip or create drama, but because he was genuinely concerned about me and wanted to make sure I had support from people who knew us both. The response he got was eye-opening. Apparently, multiple people had noticed Willa's treatment of me over the past year. My coworker Braden mentioned that at the company Christmas party, Willa had made several comments about my lack of ambition and compared me unfavorably to other husbands who were there. He said it was uncomfortable to watch and that his wife had commented on it afterward. Our neighbor Kaysen, who we'd had dinner with a few times, told Timothy that his girlfriend had always felt bad for me because of how dismissive Willa was during social conversations. She'd apparently mentioned to Kaysen that she didn't understand why Willa had married me if she was so dissatisfied with who I was as a person. The most surprising feedback came from Leighton, someone from Willa's own friend group. She reached out to Timothy directly and said she'd been wanting to talk to someone about Willa's behavior for months. According to Leighton, Willa had been complaining about our marriage to their friend group regularly, always focusing on my perceived shortcomings and her regrets about settling for someone with limited potential. Leighton said that many of Willa's friends were uncomfortable with how she talked about me, but that they hadn't known how to address it without creating drama in their social circle. She mentioned that the birthday dinner incident had been the final straw for several people, and that they were questioning whether they wanted to maintain friendships with someone who could treat their spouse so cruelly in public. When I talked to my parents about all this feedback, my mom was vindicated but also heartbroken. She said she'd suspected that Willa's disrespect was visible to others, but hadn't wanted to make our problems worse by pointing it out. My dad was angrier than I'd ever seen him, especially about the recording situation and the idea that they'd been planning to use evidence of my emotional reactions against me. My dad suggested that I should be documenting these conversations and Willa's attempts to rewrite history, not for any legal purpose, but just to keep myself grounded in reality when she tried to manipulate the narrative. He said that people who gaslight their partners often escalate when their usual tactics stop working, and that I needed to protect my own sanity. By Sunday, Willa had apparently realized that word was getting out and that people weren't buying her version of events. She confronted me about Timothy talking to our friends and accused me of trying to destroy her reputation and turn people against her. I told her that I hadn't asked Timothy to reach out to anyone, and that if people were questioning her behavior, maybe she should consider why her treatment of me looked so problematic to outside observers. She said that everyone was getting a biased version of our situation, and that our private conversations were being taken out of context. Willa then made what I think was a strategic decision to try a different approach. She started being affectionate and considerate in ways she hadn't been in months. She cooked my favorite dinner, suggested we watch movies I enjoyed, and even mentioned planning a weekend trip to apologize for how stressful things had been lately. But the timing made it obvious that this was damage control rather than genuine remorse. When I pointed out that she was only being nice because she'd realized that other people were judging her behavior, she got defensive and said she was trying to rebuild our connection, but that I was being suspicious and refusing to meet her halfway. The most telling moment came when she asked if I would consider posting on social media about how we were working through our problems and how much I appreciated her efforts to improve our communication. She wanted me to publicly signal that we were moving past the birthday dinner incident and focusing on strengthening our marriage. I refused, and she accused me of wanting our marriage to fail. She said that if I was really committed to working things out, I would be willing to help repair the damage to her relationships with our friends and family. She claimed that my refusal to publicly support her was proof that I was more interested in being right than in saving our marriage. The conversation ended with Willa crying and saying she didn't know what else she could do to fix things between us. She said she'd tried apologizing, explaining her perspective, suggesting counseling, and making efforts to be more considerate, but that nothing seemed to be good enough for me. What she still doesn't understand is that this isn't about me being hard to please or holding grudges. It's about fundamental respect and compatibility. She's trying to manage the consequences of her behavior without actually changing her underlying attitude toward me and our relationship. The financial separation has been revealing in other ways too. Without my income contributing to our joint account, Willa has had to adjust her spending significantly. She's been asking me to cover specific expenses rather than having free access to our combined resources, and she's clearly not happy about having to justify purchases or plan around a smaller budget. She's also realized how much of our household maintenance and financial management I'd been handling. When the mortgage payment was due and I didn't automatically take care of it, she had to figure out the online banking system and payment schedule herself. Same thing with utilities, insurance payments, and other recurring expenses. I'm not trying to create problems or make her life difficult. I'm just not automatically taking care of everything anymore while she focuses on criticizing my contributions and planning her exit strategy. The lawyer I consulted gave me some additional advice about protecting myself during this period. He suggested keeping records of our financial arrangements and any major decisions about the house or shared assets. He also recommended that I avoid making any large purchases or financial commitments until we either reconcile genuinely or proceed with separation. Most importantly, he told me that I shouldn't feel guilty about prioritizing my own well-being and financial security while I figure out what I want from this relationship. He said that too many people stay in destructive marriages because they feel obligated to keep trying, even when their partner shows no genuine respect or commitment to change. Right now, I'm focused on maintaining my boundaries and not getting pulled back into the cycle of disrespect and false reconciliation that had been our pattern for months. Willa can be as nice and affectionate as she wants, but until she acknowledges the real problems and how she's been treating me, I'm not interested in pretending everything is fine. The support from friends and family has been incredible, and it's helped me realize how isolated I'd become in trying to manage Willa's constant criticism and disappointment. Having people validate that her behavior was unacceptable has been more healing than I expected. Still figuring out what comes next, but at least now I'm making decisions from a position of strength rather than just reacting to her manipulation and control tactics. Final update. This is probably going to be my last post about this situation, and honestly, I'm writing it from a completely different headspace than when this all started. For those who've been following along, thank you for the support and advice. It helped me more than you know. The end came faster than I expected, and it wasn't because of some dramatic confrontation or ultimatum. It was because Willa finally showed me exactly who she is when she can't control the narrative anymore. Wednesday morning, I got a text from my brother Sean, who lives across the country. He said Willa had reached out to him through Facebook, which was weird because they'd maybe spoken 5 times in the 3 years we'd been married. She'd sent him a long message about how worried she was about my mental health and asking if our family had noticed any concerning changes in my behavior lately. According to the message Sean forwarded me, Willa told him that I'd been acting paranoid and vindictive since my birthday, and that she was concerned I might be having some kind of breakdown. She said I'd been isolating myself from friends, making irrational financial decisions, and becoming increasingly hostile toward her when she tried to help me work through whatever was going on. She asked Sean if he could talk to our parents about staging some kind of intervention, because she was scared that my mental state was deteriorating and that I might do something to hurt myself or damage our relationship permanently. She even suggested that I might need professional help and that my family should consider ways to get me into therapy. When Sean called me about this, he was furious. He said the message was so manipulative and condescending that his wife had read it and immediately said it sounded like someone trying to turn a person's family against them. He wanted to know what was really going on, so I gave him the full story about the birthday dinner and everything that had happened since. Sean's response was to ask why I was still living with someone who thought so little of me that she'd try to convince my own family that I was mentally unstable. He said that regardless of whatever problems we might have had in our marriage, reaching out to my relatives to question my sanity was beyond unacceptable. That evening, I confronted Willa about the message to Sean. She didn't deny it, but she tried to frame it as genuine concern for my well-being. She said she'd been watching me become increasingly isolated and angry, and that she thought my family deserved to know that I was struggling with what she called a major life transition. When I asked her what life transition she was referring to, she said she thought I was having a hard time accepting that our marriage had problems that needed professional help to resolve. She said my reaction to her birthday dinner comments had been so extreme that she was genuinely worried about my ability to process criticism and work through relationship issues like an adult. I asked her directly if she understood how insane it was to contact my family members to suggest I was mentally unstable because I'd set boundaries after she publicly humiliated me. She said she wasn't questioning my mental health, but that she was concerned about some of my recent decisions and thought my family might be able to help me gain perspective on the situation. The conversation went on for over an hour, with Willa continuing to insist that her outreach to Sean was motivated by love and concern rather than an attempt to manipulate the people closest to me. She kept saying that she was trying to save our marriage by getting support from people who cared about both of us. What finally broke through to me was when she said that if I was really committed to working things out, I should be grateful that she cared enough to involve my family in helping me understand how my behavior was affecting our relationship. She said that most wives wouldn't put in that kind of effort to fix a marriage when their husband was being so resistant to feedback and growth. That's when I realized that this wasn't going to get better. Willa fundamentally believed that my refusal to accept her disrespect and manipulation was a character flaw that needed to be fixed. She saw my boundaries as problems to be solved rather than evidence that I valued myself enough to demand decent treatment. I told her that I wanted a divorce, not because I was angry or trying to punish her, but because we clearly had incompatible values about what a marriage should look like. She immediately started crying and saying that she couldn't believe I was willing to throw away 3 years together over a misunderstanding about communication styles. She asked if we could take a break from the divorce conversation and focus on rebuilding our connection through couples therapy. She said she'd already researched several therapists and found one who specialized in helping couples navigate major transitions and learn healthier communication patterns. I explained that I wasn't interested in therapy with someone who had just spent 2 weeks trying to convince my own family that I was mentally unstable because I'd set financial boundaries and refused to pretend that public humiliation was acceptable behavior in a marriage. Willa got defensive and said she'd never called me mentally unstable, just expressed concern about some recent changes in my behavior that seemed concerning to her. She said that caring partners pay attention to each other's well-being and seek support when they're worried about their spouse's emotional state. The next morning, I called the divorce attorney I'd consulted and told him I was ready to move forward with filing papers. He walked me through the process and timeline, and we discussed how to handle the financial separation and asset division as amicably as possible. When I told Willa that I'd contacted a lawyer, she accused me of making a unilateral decision about our marriage without giving therapy or reconciliation a real chance. She said she felt betrayed that I'd taken such a major step without discussing it with her first. I reminded her that we'd had multiple conversations about the problems in our relationship, and that her response had been to justify her behavior and try to convince my family that I was the problem. I told her that when someone shows you that clearly who they are and how they view you, it's important to believe them. Over the next few days, Willa alternated between being apologetic and affectionate and being angry about what she called my refusal to fight for our marriage. She said she'd been trying to work through our problems together, but that I was giving up the moment things got difficult. The most revealing conversation happened on Saturday night. Willa asked me what it would take for me to reconsider the divorce, and I told her that I'd need to see genuine acknowledgement of how she'd been treating me and real changes in her attitude toward our relationship. She said she thought she'd already done that by explaining her perspective and trying to be more considerate over the past few weeks. When I pointed out that explaining isn't the same as apologizing and that temporary niceness isn't the same as fundamental respect, she got frustrated and said she didn't know what else I expected from her. I told her that I expected to be treated like someone she loved and respected rather than someone she was trying to fix or manage. She said that loving someone meant caring enough to help them grow and improve, and that she'd been trying to support my development as a partner and provider. That conversation made it clear that we had fundamentally different definitions of what love and respect look like in a marriage. Willa saw love as conditional acceptance, based on my ability to meet her expectations and standards. I saw love as accepting and supporting someone while they pursue their own growth and happiness. The divorce process has been surprisingly straightforward since we don't have kids, and our assets are relatively simple to divide. Willa has been cooperative with the practical aspects, though she's continued to express regret about what she calls my decision to give up on our relationship. What's been most healing is the support I've gotten from friends and family throughout this process. My parents have been incredible, and they've made it clear that they're proud of me for prioritizing my own well-being and refusing to accept treatment that undermined my self-worth. Timothy and several other friends have also been amazing. It turns out that multiple people had been concerned about Willa's treatment of me for months, but hadn't known how to bring it up without overstepping boundaries. Having their validation and support has helped me realize how isolated I'd become while trying to manage Willa's constant criticism and disappointment. The financial separation has also been eye-opening. Without having to subsidize Willa's lifestyle and spending habits, I've been able to save money and make plans for my own future. I'm looking at apartments in a part of town I've always liked, and I'm even considering going back to school for a certification that could help with career advancement. Most importantly, I've learned what it feels like to live without constant criticism and judgment. Not having to defend my choices, explain my interests, or justify my existence to someone who's supposed to be my partner has been liberating in ways I didn't expect. The divorce should be finalized in a few months, and I'm looking forward to building a life where I don't have to constantly prove my worth to someone who's already decided I'm not good enough. I've learned that self-respect isn't selfish, and that refusing to tolerate mistreatment isn't the same as giving up on relationships. For anyone dealing with similar situations, the biggest thing I've learned is that you can't convince someone to respect you who has fundamentally decided that you're beneath them. You can only choose whether or not to accept that treatment and build your life accordingly. Thanks again to everyone who supported me through this process. Your comments and messages helped me realize that I deserved better treatment and gave me the courage to actually demand it. Now I'm focused on building a future where I'm valued for who I am rather than criticized for who I'm not. And honestly, for the first time in months, I'm actually excited about what comes next